Join us by the fireside for our evening tales of true life's strange experiences with things that lie beyond the veil of the known and into the misty depths of the mysterious and unknown. The weird smell in a Virginia woods. I worked with a guy, and it was about 2 summers ago, and he was really into hiking. And he was about 25, and he had already hiked 30 of the 14,000 plus foot peaks in the US. We decided to stay overnight one night in his van in a parking lot at the foot of a popular cliff so that we could start first thing in the morning. And he told us a story of something that he experienced once. Although I should say he didn't know what this thing was exactly, but anyway, on with the story. So he said that he had just visited home. This was, way back when he had that experience. And home was in Virginia, and it was halfway through his countrywide hiking tour. And he wanted to climb some of the local peaks that he had done in the past, and just a single overnight in the mountains. So he decided to take his dog with him. Actually, it was the family dog. And, the dog was kind of old by now, but she used to join the family on vacations and stuff. When they got out there, though, he realized that the family dog was now a bit older and wasn't really that eager of a hiker as he had hoped for. She was still happy to be with him and to tag along, and she wagged her tail and was just really friendly to fellow hikers. And she just kind of ran around sniffing under every rock. And, she was just a bit slower now. Because of the slow pace, they didn't end up getting back to the car parked at the bottom of the first mountain until about 7 p.m., an hour or so before dark. So it was about an hour's drive to the following mountain on the list, and they just booked it. Another 30 minutes up the mountain to the lean-to that he'd been planning on staying the night in. He figured that they could make it there in less than an hour after sunset. Not true night at all. That didn't sound like too much trouble. Well, they made it to the parking lot at the bottom of the next mountain exactly at sunset, which was just after 8 o'clock. And there were no cars there. It was just empty. So he thought, great, we'll have the whole lean-to to ourselves. But there was a problem. His dog was now refusing to get out of the car. She was old, though, and hadn't eaten, so he wanted to feed her at the lean-to so she wouldn't get sluggish on the climb. So he didn't really think anything of it. Still, she was whining and whimpering like she was, a puppy all over again. Even when he picked her up and put her on the ground, she tried to just bolt back into the car. It was only when he'd gotten her out of the car and shut the doors and then started walking to the entrance of the hike that she finally relented and started following him. Up on the trail, it was a little bit darker than he'd thought, and his dog just was kind of sulking along. Her tail was between her legs, and she was constantly kind of trying to trip him up by walking directly between his feet. It was annoying and would slow them down even more, but at least she was going along with him now. From his past trips on this trail, he knew that there was a sign-in box not far away. He used to keep track of the people on the mountain in case they go missing or something. Since this was his triumphant return back home after mastering so many high peaks, he figured he'd actually bother to sign in, a worthy trophy for the prodigal son. He got the sign-in box and switched on his headlight, which he hadn't been using up to this point. He used the red bulb because it preserves your night vision much better than white light. He opened the box, found the golf pencil and the logbook, and yep, when he checked the names and dates, he saw that everyone else had left the mountain before dark. Nice, he thought. I really will have the whole lean-to myself. He sat down, wrote his name and phone number in the book. Weirdly, he could kind of smell the strange metallic tang in the air. Maybe it was because he was now standing still and his sense of smell was more keen, or maybe it was the pencil graphite, or maybe the metal sign-in box was made of shoddy material and was oxidizing poorly, but the smell was strong. He closed the box and stood up. Apparently, his dog had gotten anxious waiting for him, though, because she was already starting up the trail. He could just barely make her out in the dim red of his headlight still on. He called to her, but she kept on walking as if she hadn't heard him. He cursed and started jogging after her as quickly as he could without risking turning an ankle on a rock. He started closing the distance between them and calling her name and telling her to heel the whole time. He stopped calling, however, because a sudden strange feeling kind of came over him. When he told me this story, he said he thought it was because his brain was registering hearing the wrong number of footsteps. As anyone who's walked a dog before can attest to, it's easy to hear doggy footsteps and easy to find the pattern in their pitter-patter. You can even sync your own footsteps with theirs to find a comfortable gait. It's mostly an unconscious thing, but while he was walking up this empty trail at night, my friend was suddenly struck with the suspicion that there were just too many footsteps that he could hear, more than the 6 that he should be able to count. It wasn't that there was a third set of footsteps in the night, it was more like every once in a while an extra footstep intruded into the dog-human pattern. And it kept happening, though never in the same pattern twice. Even weirder was that the extra footsteps always seemed to be coming from a different foot, every time, if that makes sense. Sometimes it seemed heavier, sometimes lighter, sometimes it seemed to scrape and trail along the leaf litter like it was heavily furred and padded. Sometimes it seemed to pierce right through as if it were hoofed. He couldn't stop to listen, not while his dog was still going up the trail, but he looked around where he dared take his eyes off the ground. The Virginia forest glowed a dim red. His headlamp was still on, but he couldn't see more than 20 feet out. The metallic scent, he realized, had grown stronger, which he guessed meant it couldn't have been the log box making it. It was now overpowering. The smell, and he could feel his eyes watering, and there was also a desire to vomit. The smell was very clearly not smell of blood, which he realized was only unsettling him more. What substance is similar to blood, but at the same time somehow isn't? Anti-blood? He desperately wanted to make it to the lean-to, to find a place where he could be still and listen for a moment and figure out what was going on. He was starting to feel really scared. Something was definitely wrong and just did not feel right. He knew it wasn't far now, and it was easy to tell when it was coming up. There was an easily identifiable pin-turn switchback right before it, and he was coming up to it now. Out of breath from jogging in the dark, the overpowering smell making him feel like he had to puke, the red light flashing over the ground in frenetic spurts, he kept his eye on his dog as she approached the switchback, because he knew she'd be out of his line of sight for a few seconds. He watched her vanish around the boulder that marked the edge of the switchback, but of course that meant that he hadn't been looking at his feet. He turned his ankle on some unseen rock and fell. He closed his eyes in pain, and then, as he looked up, he saw his dog running in full tilt back down towards him. When she reached him, she cowered between his legs, and suddenly there were no sounds at all in the woods. It was completely still, and then he very clearly heard a set of footsteps galumphing towards them. That horrible smell was so stifling that he couldn't breathe. Suddenly, He just picked up his dog and he found the strength to get up and run. Ignoring his painful ankle, he booked it, one arm clutching his panicked dog across his chest. He said he couldn't hear anything following him, but that was probably because he was trying to block out anything that would distract him. It isn't easy to sprint down a mountain in the dark in full panic mode carrying a dog, but he made it back down. He hopped in his car and took the turn out of the parking lot so fast that he sprayed sheets of gravel higher than his car. When he looked at the digital clock on his dash, it said 8:06. He drove the 3 hours back home all in one sitting, and his dog cowered in his lap the entire time. That's pretty much where, the story ends, but he did say that the next day he got a call from the DCR, the state agency that runs Virginian state parks. The park ranger on the phone was checking up on him because, of course, he hadn't signed out in the logbook when he was fleeing down the mountainside. And as far as the state knew, he was lost in the woods. He told the ranger that he was fine, that he'd gone to hike but found it too dark to continue and so had gone home and earned himself a chewing out. The ranger raged about how much work the rangers have to do, the importance of their job, how they can't afford to be distracted by negligent hikers, etc. He apologized. And then, wanting to ask about the previous night's horror, but not willing to mention it aloud, he just asked the ranger if he'd recently noticed a strong metallic smell on the mountain. The park ranger was silent for a moment and then said, "The lengths you asshole kids go to scare us with this skinwalker shit," and then hung up. I had never heard anything about the smell. I'd always heard about descriptions of the skinwalkers, but I've never actually heard anything about the smell, and that's very interesting. If it's not blood, then I wonder what this smell is, what it's comparable to. But it certainly sounds like it's something that people are familiar with, people who have experienced seeing these beings or being around them or whatever. Well, I'm just glad you managed to get out of there. And it sounds like the rangers, have some knowledge of this stuff too. I'm sure they hear all kinds of stories and know about all kinds of things that go on in the state parks. Sea monster. I was on a ferry for a school softball trip once, and this was off Kodiak Island in 2014. I was 18. A whole bunch of us had snuck up to the deck, and it was around 11 p.m., and we were watching the waves and smoking and just generally being teenagers on a boat, without supervision. It was 11 p.m. and it was May in Alaska, so the sun was thinking about setting, but it was still pretty bright outside. So we're just doing our thing, and we noticed that there was this pod of orcas swimming with the ferry's wake, which was very cool, but not unusual. If you're familiar with the dimensions of an orca fin, you know that they're about 4 to 6 feet in height, and they look like big black spikes coming out of the water. They travel and hunt in pods of anywhere between 15 to 40 whales. Predators. The beautiful murderers of the sea. Total a-holes. Top of the food chain. So we saw a pod of orcas and we counted them to be around 10 to 15 with some babies scattered in there. They were really fun to watch, and it took them a good 30 minutes to go by. We were trying to get pictures, but it was just kind of getting dark enough, and our phone cameras were kind of crappy. And then another 30 or 40 minutes went by, and we've all kind of sobered up, and it's about to get dark, and we're getting kind of cold and sleepy and about ready to go in. No more orcas. Haven't seen one for maybe half an hour. And then one of the girls spots another one. So we all turn and look. But one dorsal fin is immediately followed by another and another and another and then more. and then two more after that, and in two separate rows, and they're taller by a lot and jagged, like some have whole chunks torn out of them. And they're all 8 to 10 feet high, and they're all attached to one creature, and we can just barely see its back slicing through the water, covered in these rows of spikes. And it just keeps on coming. This thing is like 20 or 30 feet from the ferry, running parallel to it, and we are all transfixed. There's like 9 or 10 of us, and no one is saying anything because we've all turned to look at a whale, and we are all now watching something that is like horrifically, terrifyingly not a whale. Someone tries to take a picture, but it's too dark at this point, and the only reason we can see this thing is the light cast from ferry portholes. Take as old as time when it comes to things that you really wish you had a picture of. But we all stood there completely scared stiff and in awe, and we watched this thing just keep surfacing for a good 6 or 7 minutes, which means that whatever it was long, like maybe 60 or 70 feet long, or maybe longer, who knows? And it was covered in enormous spikes. Spikes that looked like they'd won thousands of battles with God knows what. It took what felt like an eternity for any of us to say anything after the last of it disappeared back into the strait. I mean, if you and like 8 of your friends had just all seen something that all science had definitely pointed to not existing, and you had all seen the same thing, and it was very obviously trailing, hunting, not one, but 15 something predators, what do you even say to break that silence? That's the thing that eats me about the whole thing. Was it hunting? It was following them. It was literally hunting about 60 tons of toothy, angry intelligence, apex predators. Every once in a while, one of us will hit another one of us up and check in like, do you remember this? Was I hallucinating? Did we all see the same insane, worldview melting, terrifying thing that night? And the reason I know we did is because none of us talked about it after that. Not during the trip, not after, not to any of our friends, because how the hell do you even tell someone about something like that? Now, it's been about 10 years between us and that night, and I assume that some of them have probably told some people. I know I tell people because I've seen a lot of stuff like that in Alaska. And also because there's a very rich history among native Alaskans of something that lives and hunts in the waters around Kodiak. And it's important to tell its story because someday it's going to eat a little too much plastic. And no one will ever watch it hunt a pod of orcas from a boat ever again. Wow. That sounds absolutely massive, doesn't it? And it certainly does sound like it was hunting the orcas. But maybe it was hunting boats, ferries? Who knows? But wow, that certainly sounds like a sea monster sighting. What an experience. That's the kind of thing you never forget. Pigman. I was at a Halloween party on a friend's less than suburban house that was off a highway and down a long gravel path. Their land included several acres of land, some of them being a large front yard and the rest leading to a cleared field and forest. It was tradition for them to make a trail in the woods for people to walk down and scare them. They usually decorated well, and even though I could see the jump scares, they still startled me. I had gone out onto that trail several other times before and after and never had another strange occurrence. As night began to fall, they started loading up a trailer with hay bales and people to transport to the starting location of the trail. The trailer had what was like fencing around it, making it seem kind of like a cage that I had believed protected us from anything in the woods. The slow ambling ride through the inky blackness of the fields would have been much more unnerving without it. The scary story they used changed every year, and that year it was the story of a pigman. You can pretty much guess the story. Lady gave birth to messed up baby. Baby grows up abused and hidden from others, eventually flips out and kills family and escapes into woods. Exactly what you want to hear as a child who's scared of the dark in the middle of the dark, creepy forest. We started walking on the trail, and I saw the older brother and dad of my friend with pig masks and axes on separate occasions along the trail. I knew they were human because the masks left a lip around their necks and their hands were normal. I can still remember what they wore: stereotypical flannel and jeans with work boots, both in red to try and match to give the appearance of one pigman. Near the end of the trail, there was a small shack, almost, and there was a front and back entrance, and the mom, Pam, was inside dressed as a witch, which I didn't remember fitting into the story at all. But she gave out candies, so I had shut up and grabbed some as I walked through and out the other side. When I turned around, I saw it. The shack was rather short. I had to stoop when I was inside, and Pam had been sitting. There was a pigman with his hooves on, resting on the roof of the shack, almost seeming like he was peering inside. I almost said something to him, but my voice froze when I realized the difference. Hooves. My eyes looked for the end of the mask and didn't find it. Neither the dad nor the son, Caleb, was stocky, nor had either of them been wearing dirty overalls. I got out of there as quickly as I could, realizing later that I basically abandoned everyone else to die or something if the pigman wasn't my imagination. I don't have an explanation for what I saw except for the over-imagination of an 8-year-old, and now I regret not waiting for anyone else or asking Pam about it. I wonder, what I really saw in that woods that night, and either way, I will never forget it. It seems that these pigman sightings have gained popularity, and I don't know why or what it even is. I mean, what exactly is pigman? What has it evolved from? I guess the logical brain wants to find answers, um, but it's kind of hard to do. But anyway, as far as I know, it's supposed to be not a very nice entity. But it certainly sounds like there's a possibility that that might have been the real thing instead of someone dressed up. And that's pretty scary. Creepy stories. My parents used to flip houses. This was when I was younger. And my dad one time bought this really creepy log cabin in the woods to flip. It was owned by an older woman and her 2 children. The children were both really underfed. The boy looked like he was 12, but was really 16 or 17, as far as I recall. It was all kind of messed up, the situation to begin with. So, anyway, this cabin had no heat, and it was on 40 acres of land in the middle of nowhere. They had sealed all the windows and never cleaned the chimney, so a lot of the smoke would come out from the fireplace instead of escaping out the chimney. The woman also had crosses above every door and window. They were also hoarders, so their whole cabin was just full of stuff. The land itself also just felt off to me. There was just something not quite right about the feeling. I always felt like, you were being watched, and my brother and sister felt the same way too. At one point, my parents were working on the place and they had all the doors and windows open. And all of a sudden, they heard a screaming sound coming from deep in the woods, and it was moving fast. Next thing they knew, there was this orb of light that came flying in through the front door. It was letting off the shrieking noise that they were hearing, and it immediately disappeared through the ceiling. The noise went on for a bit, but was fading quickly. They left pretty hurriedly. So last I heard about it, my dad told me that after we sold the place, a couple moved into the cabin for weekend getaways. They ended up tearing it completely down and rebuilding it further up the road because of these weird things that kept happening there. So that was like my first, most prominent, scary story of the paranormal encounters. But my second one was, when I was sleeping one day and I woke up, and I used to think actually that I had poltergeist or something following me around from house to house. I've only seen this thing twice though. My room was in the basement of a condo, and tight outside my window was a sidewalk lamp. So my bedroom would be slightly illuminated. On this particular day, I had actually been awake for a while, like, at least 2 hours or something. And I felt, there was something, a presence or something there, and it felt really weird. Like when you know that your pet is staring at you, but, you're being watched, but it's not threatening, that kind of feeling. I ended up rolling over and I finally opened my eyes to check my phone. And all of a sudden, I saw an incredibly tall man standing in the corner of my room. The ceiling was about 8 feet tall, and his shoulders and head was slouched to fit. And he was just this dark shadow, basically. I just rolled over, terrified, because I didn't know what else to do, and I just pretended he wasn't there. That same thing happened another time, but he was on the opposite side of the room by my closet. And each time it was like I was so terrified that I just didn't know what to do. I couldn't summon up the strength to get up and just run out or anything. So I would just lay in bed and just cover my head up and just eventually, I would just fall asleep and then everything would be fine. So I don't know why this thing was there. I don't know if something happened in that area, in that condo. I have no idea about the history of it and why this appeared. Or, maybe it was this that was following me around. I'm really not sure. Well, it's often the case that, whenever something happens, some traumatic thing happens in a house or on a piece of land or something, you get these visitations from these entities, negative energies, or whatever. So it'd be interesting to kind of know what happened on that land where the log cabin was. But definitely sounds like there was some kind of possession thing going on or some kind of haunting. And the second one is, pretty common, really. The black shadow person, and you kind of wonder what that's about too.